Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
And I'm Stephen Park. And we are currently reading through Pachinko. We're almost about halfway through, but this book has got me thinking, has got me feeling. So a question I had for you, Jamae, is when you were growing up, were there any perceptions you had on your own people, like Filipinos, things like that? How did you perceive your own culture?
I think when I was growing up as a kid, I perceived like my people, my Filipino-ness as a little bit. The word that comes to mind is kengkoy, and kengkoy in Tagalog means like weird. And I felt that in comparison to what I thought of U.S. American culture, I thought that we were really weird in comparison because our foods were much simpler, or it definitely reflected hard times. And whenever we would go back, and we went back very frequently, almost every year, and knowing that my family left such a hard place to live in, I was always reminded that we were not in the best social and economic structure. And because of that, I felt like as a Filipino, I was very weird and awkward and strange.
And on the other note, how did you perceive people who are Korean?
I thought, and because I wasn't fully immersed in the culture, but all I knew of Koreans were the tourists who came, or the students and the students' families who would immigrate to Guam as a gateway to get into the United States. So because of that, I thought they were really cool. And I loved learning about them. I loved especially their food. That's why I thought they were so cool, because the food that they brought was always in these really cute containers. You knew that their families loved them because they would dress really nice. They would have the cutest pencils. And so I felt like their families loved them. Not that my parents didn't love me, but the care and what I perceived as the expense that was given to these students or given to these young people made me feel like I wish I were Korean.
So I agree in a way, but you also saw a side that the people that immigrated from Korea to Guam were more specific to a certain economic class.
For the most part, but not all of them were well off. So even though they weren't well off, they somehow always had the cutest things. And they always had the most delicious food. Specifically, when I think of my 4th grade year, one of my friends who is half Korean and half Mexican, she would always come, like I said, with really cute food. And what we would do is all of us, my friends, would try to exchange food with just her. Like, we would all fight to exchange food with her. And she would usually only exchange with one other person. So whoever was the lucky person, we envied them.
So it's interesting. When I saw people who were Filipino growing up, I was in certain ways very envious, and I didn't really know this perception of something that I've been picking up more as I've gotten older, but this perception of Southeast lighter skinned Asian people being quote unquote like higher class or something, or there was that whole perception.
Totally.
But the fact that people who were brown were seen as not as good in a way. So I didn't really realize this was there growing up. So what I saw when I saw families and people getting together, I saw a lot of love in Filipino culture.
For sure.
And that's all I really knew is love and food. I knew that food was always abundant. There's always a lot of singing, and there's always a lot of love. When I looked at Korean culture from the inside out, I also saw this feeling of prestige that I think when I was growing up, I never thought that Koreanness was a bad thing.
For sure.
I was always hesitant and kind of ashamed of being Korean in America, but I never thought it was because Koreans were at the bottom of the totem pole.
Mm.
I think it was so interesting starting to go into this book and seeing Korean people, which I knew that as a nation, Korea's been colonized many times over. We have two different counting systems that are based off of Chinese and Japanese. So it's very apparent in our history of what's happened, but I never really thought of Korean people as lesser than until reading this book. And kind of the way that Min Jin Lee kind of writes all this out is she is very good at giving a portrayal of what it looked like at the time. I think I get such vivid images. And it's like, oh wow, like Korean people were very trampled upon, very looked down upon. I mean, there's even that word that they used very early on in the book called yobos or something, which I think is originated from what spouses kind of call each other, which is yobo.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see this point of view, which I never thought of. And, you know, I never thought I personally was better than someone because I was Korean, but I know that can be the sentiment, like with Southeast Asian cultures over other cultures. There's different portrayals in movies. We have K-pop, things like that.
Absolutely.
But it's really interesting to see this side and this point of view.
For sure. And just to connect with the point that you made, how lighter skin tended to be favored over darker skin. And to also connect to the point of my perception of Korean people. In the Philippines in particular, we love Korean people. So when a Korean person starts acting in the Philippines, and it doesn't matter if they had any acting skills to begin with, if they join showbiz, they are loved so much, and they're put on a pedestal different from any other celebrity.
Yeah, I mean, I think even more recently with the emergence of more popular K-pop, which 90s K-pop was also really popular, but then also K-dramas and things like that being accepted. I can see, like, that's where I think the disconnect was for me, is I grew up in this era where if I looked for it, I could find Korean people succeeding and doing well. Nowadays, it's like, I don't even have to look for it. It's right there in front of me.
For sure.
So I think that hid a lot of the shame and the things that either my ancestors or my previous generations had to go through. And the thing was, I mean, this book kind of explains it out well. Like, this is the 1920s to like I think we're around the 1960s right now. Like, that's not that far ago. It's only 100 years ago. So the current generation, we still have some living relatives who have lived through it.
Right.
So it's really interesting where Korean people have come to the point where I think I was blanketed and covered. But yeah, I think it's drawn up a lot of identity, not crises, but just questions.
For sure, definitely. Especially because it's not well taught in the United States, and we're pretty much separated from our histories unless we search for them ourselves.
Right. All right. Well, speaking of which, we see Korean people succeed every now and then, and one of the people that have succeeded is going to be our recommendation for the week.
So, our recommendation for the week is Youngmi Mayer. She is a comedian and the host of her current podcast called Harry Butthole. And she is also a co-host of the now archived Feeling Asian. And that's how I found Youngmi, with Brian Park. So, what I totally enjoy about Youngmi is her honesty, openness, and social awareness. It's not just her trying to be edgy, it's her truly speaking what's on her mind in terms of what's going on in the world, what's going on in the US, and how that affects everyday people. You can find her on Instagram and Twitter at ymmayer, Mayer, M-A-Y-E-R, and on TikTok at Youngmi Mayer. And all of these will be included on the description.
Yeah, and so that's our recommendation for the week. Okay, so we are into Pachinko, this is our midway read, so the third read out of the 5 reads.
Yeah, so we're a little bit past halfway at this point.
Right. and give us a little recap.
So, in our last read, we learned that Isak and Sunja arrived in Osaka. We experienced Isak getting arrested because of his colleague, and then Isak getting released and returning home in bad shape.
Right. And within all this, we see Sunja starting to be able to create a living for not only herself, not only Noah and Mozasu, but also for Yosep and Kyunghee.
Yes.
Like, she's kind of created this thing with the kimchi business that has kind of blossomed into what can afford them a living now.
Yeah.
But that kind of leads us into the next section. So we just read Book 2, Motherland, chapters 6 through 16.
Yep.
And we start off right away with kind of answering one of the questions we had on the last podcast.
And like answering many of our predictions.
Right. And the first one right away.
So before we get into the predictions, when we were reading these chapters, at least for me, I felt like there were phases. And so the first phase is when our predictions were starting to be answered. And the very first thing that was answered was...
with Isak passing away.
When that happened in the book, I verbally just said the F word out loud.
Really? Because, like, I don't know. It happened so quickly.
Right, because it was like, Isak lives through tuberculosis. Isak lives through his past sickness. And so it was like, oh, this seems like it's building upon a theme of living past these illnesses.
Right. Which is what I thought would happen.
Which is what we both thought would happen.
But as soon as he passed away, I was like, okay. Like, it didn't shock me as much as, all right, where are we going next?
Right.
Because clearly there has to be a pathway from here.
For sure.
But there's a much bigger plot twist in this. So within this realm, the war is starting, so things are starting to tighten up around Japan.
Yes.
So this business that Sunja and Kyunghee have become kimchi makers for, which is owned by Chengho, is shutting down.
Right.
As things are being gotten together, things are being gathered so they can leave, appears a person that I didn't realize would appear so soon.
And I didn't think that this person was going to appear the way that they did.
Right. Which was wild, because we find out that Hansu comes back.
Yes, and this is the second time I verbally said the F word out loud.
Right, but it was like he came back in a way that was meant to be the angel kind of descending down. Because what he did, we find out the reason why he's here.
Right.
And the reason is he's pretty much been coordinating everything that's been happening up till this point.
Right.
So everything from Kim Chung-ho going to the market, grabbing Sunja, telling her to come make kimchi for them,
right,
giving them the money to do it, and kind of paying them this ridiculous
amount of money.
Yeah. And there was a point where we even talked about last time of why is Kim Chung-ho just all of a sudden asking these women to make them kimchi, like
when he's never tried it.
Yeah, exactly. So now we find out why.
Right.
Hansu knew at the get-go, as soon as Sunja sold her pocket watch that Hansu had given her, it kind of was this alarm or this talisman that summoned Hansu back into the story. True. And now he knew that he needed to help her out, and he knew exactly where to find her, and he's been supporting her ever since.
Right. I don't know. You mentioned how it seems like he was supposed to be like this angel descending from heaven. When I was reading it, it felt like a demon that was just summoned. Like you said, when the watch was sold to the pawnbroker, it felt like it was a summoning token for a demon to come up and be like, whoa, I'm going to control this family. And I know he has good intentions in supporting Noah because he is his son. But, and we'll probably talk about this more later, but Sunja is constantly thinking, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And in my mind, I'm asking the same thing.
So I'm not a fan of Hansu, which clearly you aren't either.
No.
But I do think that this is the only way that Sunja and the entire family survive.
Yeah. I get that.
It sucks.
Yeah.
And it's very much a result of wartime and struggles and all of that. But if it wasn't for Hansu, I don't think they're getting by. Like, they were in deep starvation. They were barely able to do anything.
True.
So he's a villain, maybe. It's hard to look past my own perception and my own opinions. But if I look at him very objectively, he is kind of seen as, for me, he's seen more as an angel, because he never steps in and says, you need to do this with my kid, or you need to do this.
He tries to.
Not up till this point.
Okay, fair.
Because he hasn't impeded at all. He hasn't even shown up. He even tells Sunja, like, I gave you the will of way to kind of continue to go on.
Right.
And then into these next chapters is when he says, all right, I'm going to put my foot down because I just needed, like, this is the point that I need to get to. So until this point, though, he's only been financing her and doing it even from a hidden point, not telling her that he's been doing it. It doesn't sound like he was doing it to gain money back or gain tokens of favor in any way.
Right.
So at this point, I've had very interesting feelings about Hansu.
That's fair.
The other thing that won me over is that he brought back Youngjin. So Sunja's mom,
right.
He went all the way over there. She had to sell the boarding house.
Right.
And he brought her all the way back so that she can reunite with Sunja.
Definitely. And then also, because he predicts that the war is going to end soon and that the aftermath is going to be terrible, he does bring the whole family to this farm far away where no one is going to bother them. And so they're really well taken care of, even though I also have my reservations of this farmer and his family. It's like, dear God, is there anyone who's, like, just truly kind?
I mean, but, like, we're also thinking about desperate wartime efforts. True. I mean, Tamaguchi? I think it's Tamaguchi.
Yeah.
He's the sweet potato farmer.
Yeah.
Very much greed-driven, it sounds like.
Yes.
And his whole goal currently with the wartime is just to make more money, which is why he also appreciates the family being there, because they're good workers, but they're also really cheap.
Right, and by cheap, it's because he doesn't really pay them much.
Right.
And he thinks that just because I house them and give them food, that's more than enough. And by housing them, they're really just living in the barn.
Right.
With the animals.
Right. It's also something that Hansu gets mad at when he comes through.
Right.
He sees her in the condition that she's in, but also realizes it's still probably the best that he could do for her.
Right.
But at the same time, there's one other person that Hansu meets in all of this, and that's Noah.
Yes, his son.
Who he's never met before.
Right.
He's done all of this for them, knowing that Noah's there,
right,
but never meeting him.
And when he meets him, he's kind of really proud.
Yeah. I mean, Noah up to this point has been a very good boy around the farm. He's been
a good son.
Yeah, great at school, doing all the things that he needs to do. So it would make sense.
For sure. But the only person who's not on this farm is Yosef.
Right.
Because he chooses to go to Nagasaki for work.
Right, because there's a job that offers him 3 times as much in Nagasaki than it would there.
Right, and in one of our predictions, we did say that we think he's going to keep choosing work and it's going to be his downfall.
Right.
So he does choose work, and I think this is one of our predictions that doesn't fall in this phase because it goes into phase 2. Right.
Well, somewhere between phase 1 and phase 2. So if any of y'all actually paid attention in history, 1942 was when World War II was happening.
Yes.
And the U.S. got attacked in Pearl Harbor sometime before 1942, because I wasn't paying attention that closely either. But the response from the U.S. was to drop atomic bombs on 2 locations in Japan, and that is
Hiroshima
and Nagasaki.
Yep.
So it sticks with the actual true history, and Nagasaki is bombed while Yosef is there, and so a building falls on Yosef, burning him, extremely maiming him. And we also find out that Hansu's men are the one that eventually saved Yosef.
Yeah.
But Yosef is pretty much debilitated from here on
Right.
out.
He's always in pain. He's traumatized. He's less present.
Right.
Because he's in so much pain.
Right. And the other big thing is Yosef was always trying to be the provider.
Right.
And he could at least give off the illusion of being the provider by going into work and working very hard. But now it's a very clear change in the fact that he will not be able to be that provider.
Right. And now it's really Sunja who's shouldered that burden.
Right. So, phase 2. This is the war's aftermath.
Yes. And so, after learning about Yosef and seeing that he's back with his family, back on the farm, Yosef now realizes that Hansu is the reason behind all of this.
Right.
And because of that, this is where Yosef kind of like brings himself back together for a second and confronts Hansu and is like, stay away from Noah. Isaac is his father. You don't know who he is, and he's a better man than you ever will be.
Right. Like, Yosef has put 2 and 2 together and figured out that Hansu is the father.
Yes.
Which, when I was reading this, I like thought about Maury Povich, where it's an episode that they would constantly redo, and is like a "You're Not the Father" episode.
Oh.
And it's like they do a DNA test, and they pop out the DNA test. You're not the father. And then the guy who's not the father is doing like cartwheels or whatever he does. But it was kind of almost like the opposite of like Yosef is like, you are the father, but I don't want you to be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he has this stance so firmly in his mind that he even forbids Sunja from taking any more money from him. And I'm like, if that's the case, then you're not going to be able to live on this farm and then later live in the home that Hansu provides for everyone. By not taking any of this, he then loses everything.
But I think Yosef knows this. I don't think he's ignorant to this fact.
Right.
I think his pride is just so big that he's unwilling to give that up. I think the other part of it is his brother recently passed. I mean, I think it's been, 4 years or something?
Right, yes.
So I don't know what... I mean, that's the part that I don't think we'll ever be able to know. We can only assume, and from every reader's perspective, you're going to have a different assumption based off of your personal opinion on this current scenario.
Absolutely.
But for me, what I feel is Yosef just lost his brother. All he has remaining is his nephew or nephews, who you could clearly see he loves, because in the last, when we were talking about the last read, he comes in with candy and he chases it around. Like, he has this very passionate love for his nephew. So the fact that he lost his brother, like, all of that probably leads to him being even more stubborn and
more protective.
Exactly, because I mean, we know that Yosef is very old school. Like, we know that he didn't want his wives working. So now to get a handout from someone who is technically the father and like this whole complicated issue, I can see the character of Yosef sticking strong to this.
Totally, that's fair. And speaking of complications, there's also another thing that comes out of this war aftermath, in that Kim Chung-ho starts to, or we start to be introduced into his mind. And what we learn is that he has this infatuation with Kyung-hee.
Right.
Which further complicates not only his role in this family, but also Kyung-hee's situation with her husband.
Right. And this is a relationship that kind of falls in and out within these chapters that we read.
Right.
I didn't see this coming at all when they first were introduced, which just seems weird. But then all of a sudden, he has this very strong affection for Kyung-hee. There's that whole talk with Hansu and Chang-ho where they're going to the brothel, and then Hansu's talking about how he already knows that Chang-ho really has feelings for Kyung-hee.
And the reason why they're going to this brothel is so that Hansu is hoping that Chang-ho will forget about Kyung-hee.
Right. it's clear that Jung-ho has his own moral boundaries and lines that he's not willing to cross.
Yes.
There are some really gross moments in this read where he does things that are kind of really creepy and listening and things like that. But he has a very strong viewpoint on making sure that that marriage is still protected, and he also doesn't wish death upon Yosep. Now, later on in the read, Yosep comes back and says, look, I know you have feelings for my wife. This is when Chung-ho and Yosep are alone, and he says, I know you have feelings for my wife. You can't have her while I am alive, but I'm probably gonna die.
Right.
When that happens,
I give you my blessing.
Yeah, it seemed less like I give you my blessing, and it seemed more like I give her to you. And it's like, because we don't know, I don't know if he's thought of, or if they've had the conversation of, does she like him? Which, from the insinuation of our read from a third person narrative,
right,
we see that she might have feelings for Kim Chung-ho.
I have an opposite interpretation. It feels like Chung-ho is just a friend
to Kyung-hee.
Yes.
The reason why I think that she does have an infatuation is when they go on that walk later, where Chung-ho and Kyung-hee are alone, and he's telling her that Yosep has given her the green light to be with him, and he's trying to start this relationship early.
Right.
It seems like she wants to honor that in a way. Like, she wants to reflect that and say, like, oh, I do want to be in a relationship with you, but not while my husband's alive.
So the reason why I think it's more friendly rather than budding romance is, yes, she does cry and say that she can't because her husband's alive, but the words that she used was, I can't have two men have these feelings for me. She doesn't say, I can't have these feelings for two men.
True.
So she's feeling guilty because she has attention.
Right.
And then she also says to him directly is, you've been such a good friend.
Right.
And she doesn't say instead, I wish I could have these feelings for you.
Right.
So that was just my interpretation.
And at this point, where we finished our read, all of it seemingly is going to be moot, because Chung-ho goes back to Korea, because once Kyung-hee rejects him, he kind of just leaves the house.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Like, not only is he rejected, but how else can he continue living in the same home?
Right. And he wanted to go back to Korea. Like, it was the original conversation that he had with Hansu.
Right.
I want to pursue this part of my life.
For sure.
Yeah. So, who knows if he's actually out of the picture, but he may be. But if we think of the next phase of things that are kind of occurring, it's that the family's struggling again.
Yes. And in this next phase, we see that Noah is trying his very, very best to perform really well in Japanese society, and to the fact that he doesn't want to work for any Korean business people. He wants to work solely for Japanese men.
Right. And one of the reasons why he's struggling so much is because he's working all the time while he's going through school.
Exactly.
He also doesn't have the same schooling as all the other kids.
He doesn't have tutors.
Yeah, and he's just moved from Osaka to the farm and then back to Osaka. Like, his childhood isn't very steady.
Yes.
They're not having a ton of money. So yeah, the tutor thing plays into effect, where every one of his counterparts who are middle class, according to Hansu, are getting tutors.
Right.
So yeah, he's definitely going to struggle. We also find that what we thought would happen of the restaurant being such a steady scenario for them right before our current read, that goes down the drain really quickly.
Yeah.
The farm that they work on doesn't pay them extremely well.
No.
And Yosef won't let the family accept money from Hansu, so they're
so it's
not
like
that
they're
much money.
Stuck. Yeah. And not only is Noah struggling, but Musasu is also struggling.
Right.
And he's struggling in school not because he doesn't have tutors, but because he doesn't want to be there.
Right. Completely different way.
Yeah, and although he's getting bullied, he has a different approach than what Noah did. Instead of internalizing, I think Mozasu is such a BA, bad butt. He is so, like, I wish I were him when I was a kid. So, like, I do not condone violence, but Mozasu, instead of internalizing, would fight back.
I thought it was interesting, and I don't think it's every single time, but there are only a few times in Pachinko so far that I've seen cuss words. Every single time, it seems like it's revolved around Mozasu. It may not be him saying it,
right,
but the words appear when Mozasu is the figure that we're surrounding.
Yes.
Because the vibe that I got was that he was angry, that there was a lot of angst. I mean, a lot of teenage spirit and being bullied on and picked on.
Yeah.
As he continues to grow and develop, though, he never loses the fact that he wants to be a provider for his family.
Right.
He still loves his family.
He still wants to be a good son.
Exactly. That part is never lost. He still wants to be a really great brother to Noah.
Right. And with him fighting back and still wanting to be a good citizen in this society, one of the examples is when he sees a Japanese kid in his class who's trying so hard to be accepted, but everyone is laughing and snickering at him. And Mozasu swoops in and is like, you gotta stop this. I can't keep watching you be bullied by these people. And then they become fast friends.
This is Haruki.
Haruki, yes.
Was he full Japanese for some reason?
Yes, he is full Japanese. Okay. Which is why Mozasu was so frustrated, because he's a full Japanese by descent, but he was treated worse than those who are half.
So we see that Mozasu's fighting eventually gets him into trouble.
In the market.
Right. So he's doing it because he sees this girl getting harassed. So it's not that he's just randomly going out and starting fights.
Right.
It didn't even sound like he really wanted to do this, but it just seemed like a last resort because of the guy harassing the girl.
Beyond just harassment, he grabbed her.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Then this guy who's supposed to have money or something calls the police comes, and Mozasu is getting in trouble.
Yes.
What he remembers from Noah telling him is like, you need to be very respectful to the police. So that's a bit that kind of saves him for a while. But the other part that really saves him is Goro.
Right. And not just Goro, but other witnesses.
True.
Yes. But Goro, like you said, is the one who like really swoops in and saves him. And because Goro has such a good reputation with the police, Goro is able to say, no, it's okay, I got it, he's fine, he's a good kid.
Right, because he would frequent the candy shop that Sunja works at.
Yeah, exactly.
But not only does Goro save him from the police, but he offers Mozasu a job at his pachinko store.
Yes, and he says, I'm gonna make him a pachinko boy. And once I heard that, in my brain, all these alarm bells were going off like, Chekhov's gun! Chekhov's gun!
I mean, this is the first time we really see pachinko being used.
Right.
Like, it's like the namesake of the book, like pachinko.
Right, and who knew Mozasu was going to be the connecting factor to the entire story? I think.
As far as we know so far.
Right, exactly.
So Goro now teaches Mozasu the way of kind of running the pachinko machines, running the pachinko store. And this is where we start getting a changeover of things that are happening with the family again. Like, we had the high of them working as kimchi makers in the shop, and then we have the low of the wartime stuff and everything kind of losing out.
And the family struggles as well.
Right. Also to mention, they have now moved back to Osaka because Hansu has built that house back up for them with his own contractor. So now they're back in their original town. Yeah. Noah is now working to get his application in for Waseda.
Yeah.
Mozasu is now starting this new job. Sunja and Kyunghee are working as candy makers, and Youngjin is also helping. So
they have all this good fortune coming slowly into their lives.
Right.
Which brings us into phase 4, which is the family finding more wins.
Right.
And one of those wins is that Noah gets into Waseda.
Right. And he has to apply twice.
Right.
The first time he takes the test, he doesn't make it. But the second time, he does.
Right. And he does this on his own.
Right.
Like, again, still no tutors, still no outside assistance, and he's still working.
Right. The issue is that even with everyone working, except Yosef, even with everyone working, there's no way that they're going to make up for not only his tuition, but the fact that he's going to have a rent in, I think it was Tokyo?
Yes. He has to move all the way to Tokyo. He has to make rent, and also for books and all the other expenses that come with going into a city.
Right. Fortunately, Yosef is a very thoughtful and kind person who accepts the money from other people.
No. So at first, I was starting to have hope, like a little glimmer of hope for Yosef, because he starts to realize his mistakes. His mistake in bringing his brother to Japan, his mistake in going to Nagasaki for work, and realizing that all of these things has brought them to this place. And so I was like, great, now he's going to open up his... Nope, he's not opening up his heart. He is closing it again, and he's like, no, we cannot get money from Hansu. Tell Mozasu to get a loan from Goro. And I was like, who? What? No.
So let me clarify. So Yosef says no to the money.
Yes.
He absolutely shuts it down.
Yes.
But Hansu does call in Sunja and Noah separately. He has a chat, and this is where we kind of talked in the beginning of this episode of, this is where Hansu puts his foot down and says, I need to do this for him.
Yeah.
And it is definitely pushier than I would have wanted it to be.
Fair.
But still, we see later in, I think, the next chapter after that Noah has never seen a period of his life where he's only had to study.
Yeah.
This is something my parents always told me when I was growing up, is don't worry about working. Like, we didn't have a lot of money, but they're like, don't worry about working. Your job is to be a student. Like, do your best in school. Noah being so passionate about his learning, I think this meant so much to him to not have to work, to not have to worry about where his finances are going to come from, to actually be able to focus on his studies.
Totally.
And this is why it's hard for me to fully hate Hansu. Like, I do still see him as a villain. I don't think he's done everything in the right way. And that's besides the fact that his family is like a criminal family. It's more just the person that he is.
Yeah.
But he's helping Noah, I think, in the right way. Because Sunja's never going to accept that money.
No.
She wants to pay him back, but he has, like, I think he says it in this book, like, this money means nothing to me.
Right.
I need to do this for Noah.
Right.
And I think if we look at it from a completely objective standpoint, it's very sweet and caring.
Towards Noah, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But on the other side of that, it is still making a deal with the devil for Sunja, because for her, it's like, what is the rest of the deal then? I let you give this money to my son, but what are the repercussions for me, for the mother, for my family?
Right. I mean, we won't know truly what comes out from that deal until later. But we do know that at the same point, Mozasu is thriving.
Yes, like going from the floor person to manager. And then now where we're at, Goro promotes him to manager of his newest and biggest parlor, Paradise 7.
Right. So along with this promotion, Goro is very adamant on making sure that Mozasu looks up to par.
Yeah.
So Mozasu's stepping it up, and he's getting new clothes. Now the person that Goro goes to for new clothes is Totoyama. And Totoyama is Haruki's mother.
Yes, that's right. Yes, Haruki's mother. And he's been a patron of Totoyama for a long time. And as he continues to thrive in his businesses, he gives more and more money and more marketing from other businesses to go to Totoyama, which means that she's thriving as well.
Right. And this is where you said, like, oh, are there any good people in this book?
Right.
Seemingly, Goro is a good person. He's saved Mozasu, And then when he first went to the parlor with Mozasu, we met Haruki's younger brother, Daisuke.
Yeah.
And we find out that Daisuke, which I think Mozasu kind of knew a little bit about,
Right.
is somewhat disabled. Like, we don't know the full extent of his disabilities, but we do know that his speech is much younger than it should be, even though his voice is deeper. But then when Goro sees all this, he tells Totoyama to make more clothes for Mozasu. He's like, let me get this and this and this, because he just wants to pay her more, and he knows that she won't accept it.
Right.
The other thing that happens when Mozasu is going to this tailor, or to Totoyama's shop, is that he meets...
So when she's thriving, she's able to hire more people, and one of these new people is who Mozasu meets, and her name is Yumi.
Right. So he meets Yumi, who is one of the newer people that Totoyama hires because her shop is doing so well.
Yes. And Yumi's different from everyone else in that the other shop people are excited to see Goro and are not reserved in giving their adoration and admiration of him, while Yumi on the side is just like, focusing on my work, I need to get this done, I don't care who's in the shop right now.
Right. And I think this is that whole, ooh, she's not looking at me, so I'm interested thing. So Mozasu is interested in Yumi, and they begin talking.
Yes.
Okay, so that kind of leads us to where we are now. And there are different little pieces that we didn't fully go into. One of the things for me is this relationship with Hansu and Yosef. So we talked about it quite a bit. But there was a scene where Yosef is clearly in discomfort. Hansu's already given him like the pain meds and told Kyung-hee to like taper it down. But then now Hansu is sitting in front of Yosef and they're talking, and Yosef is like absolutely angry at Hansu, yelling at him. But at the end of that scene, I think the book insinuates that Hansu left a bottle of alcohol for Yosef, something that was really hard to get, but also that he really didn't want Yosef to have too much of because he could become an alcoholic.
Right.
But I was wondering, why did Hansu leave that bottle? Was it something to help Yosef with the pain because he knew Yosef was in so much pain? Or was it an act of trying to make Yosef an alcoholic? Like, is it an act of good or is it an act of evil?
Even though I dislike Hansu, I don't think he was trying to make him into an alcoholic. Because if he were to become an alcoholic, then the farmer Tamaguchi would have kicked them out.
Right.
And because Noah is such a big factor in Hansu giving them all this stuff, I don't think he would have wanted them to be in that situation.
Fair. For me, it was kind of left up to interpretation in both of those ways.
Fair.
Where we know that Yosef is living what he deems this terrible life where he's a burden to his family.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if Hansu was trying to provide him a way out. But I can also... The image I have of Hansu being like this evil villain in my brain makes it like, I'm going to give this to you as a way for you to hurt yourself. Another relationship that I was thinking of is the relationship between Mozasu and Haruki. We see a very small glimpse into this. We know where their connection now starts.
Yeah.
We get a sense of Haruki's background through the eyes of going through Goro and through Totoyama's shop.
Yes.
I think this relationship is gonna bud to something else. Like, why else would you talk so much about Haruki's family? Like, even bringing up his brother Daisuke and talking about the whole background of him and Mozasu
meeting at school.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's gonna go somewhere. I don't know where yet. I'm also very curious of this relationship of Noah and Mozasu. We know they play pretty heavily into each other's lives.
Right, but Noah's now in Tokyo and Mozasu's still in Osaka.
Right. So, a lot of relationships to get through.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to talk about, though, is the scene that we see of Noah finally in Waseda. Now, Noah's now going through school.
Yes.
We see that he is more of an outcast at Waseda. We see that he's trying to dissociate from Korean people because of politics and a lot of those things.
Right.
But in comes Akiko Fumeki.
Mm-hmm.
She's another classmate, and she is a little bit more outspoken, willing to go against the teacher.
Yeah.
She jokes that Noah and Professor Kuroda have this like relationship going on kind of thing. But there's a very specific scene where they're talking about the book Daniel Deronda by George Eliot. Now, what they talk about is that Daniel is a Jew who is freed once he realizes that he is Jewish, then goes on to marry and have a happy life. Now, so that's not like freed as in broken chains, but more just like he becomes a much happier person. Akiko is arguing that the author, George Eliot, is saying that Jewish people should live amongst their own people and live apart in their own country. So kind of like trying to reject unwanted foreigners, which was maybe the sentiment in England at the time.
Yeah.
Professor Kuroda is saying, and this is a quote, "There is great notability in being Jewish and wanting to be a part of a Jewish state." Now, for me, I was wondering if this directly was meant to reflect on Noah's current situation. So he is a Korean that has grown up in Japan. We've seen multiple times that Noah wants to be Japanese. He wants to be seen as Japanese. He doesn't want to work for a Korean company. He wants to work. So he is this person that is trapped in a different space. And I don't know if the context is that he is meant to be ejected as a foreigner to go into this other place like Daniel is. Or that's, I think, what the argument was.
Totally, exactly. And Akiko makes a good point in bringing it up and challenging the professor, and the professor trying to deflect any political statements. I was like, what an institutional thing to do.
Right. And it just seemed like such a random piece to put in the middle of the story, which is why it really made me think much more of Noah, and there has to be a reasoning of why they're showing this scene in Waseda.
Right. And like the fact that Akiko is not only a smart and like punchy type of student, she's also known as the very pretty one in school.
Right. So we don't know what's going to happen with that relationship. We still don't know what's going to happen with Noah Masasu. We don't know what's going to happen with Chengho and Kyunghee if that's over.
And Masasu and Yumi.
Yeah. We don't know what's happening with Yosep. Is this dude going to die?
Which brings us to our predictions. We are going to be finishing book 2 in chapters 17 to 20, and then moving into book 3 and starting chapters 1 through 8. With all these relationships, with the current winds where we're at in the story, what do you think is going to happen next?
I'm rooting for Mozasu and Yumi. I think it's a very cute relationship. This is the first time Mozasu has really kind of been in love, it looks like.
Or infatuated.
Right.
Or just curious.
Right. So I'm curious about that. I'm very interested in the very divergent pathways that Noah and Mozasu are taking. The fact that Mozasu is the pachinko boy is very interesting.
Yes.
I don't quite know what that means, but there is that scene where they talk about Goro teaching Mozasu how to manipulate
the machines.
Right, in just the slightest ways so you can change the outcomes.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the story, is you're manipulating different variables to get the outcome. So I think that's going to be the topic of discussion next week, is what the heck is pachinko.
For sure.
And then the fact that Yangjin comes back to see Sunja has to mean something. Like all these random appearances I don't think are going to be random.
Right.
So I'm curious what happens.
Totally. For me, I'm curious to see what Hansu and Sunja's relationship is going to look like. Yeah, are the repercussions going to happen now, like very soon, or are we going to have to wait? I'm also curious about Kyunghee and Yosep's relationship. I feel that since last time we thought that Iseok was going to continue living and ends up dying, I think it's going to be the opposite with Yosep. I think we're all hoping for better outcomes, but I think Yosep is going to continue to be in pain. And that because of Yosep's pain, Kyunghee is in extension gonna be in this pain with him?
Well, we won't know until we read it, but for anyone that wants to join in on the conversation, that wants to share any thoughts or opinions, how can they reach us?
You can email us at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com, or you can be part of the discussion on Instagram with our IG stories, with our posts, and in our DMs at Asian Book Club Pod.
We also have a website, that's asianbookclubpod.com. It also has our bookstore on there if you want to see our recommendations for things to read or things that we've already read or are planning to read.
Yeah.
And usually we end with an outro where I throw in a pun or I try to be a little creative, but I have kind of reflected back. And one of the things is every time I talk to my dad on the phone, he always ends the conversation in the same way. And he always says, be happy, be healthy, and something. And the reason I say something isn't because I don't know, which kind of I don't know, but he always changes it up. Sometimes it's good luck, sometimes it's God bless, sometimes it mumbles or static and I can't hear it, but it's always be happy, be healthy, and something. So I think the way that we're going to kind of hit these outros are be happy, be healthy, and go read a book.
Ingat. Bye.
Bye.